It was supposed to be just another flight out of San Francisco, but before the plane touched the Arizona mountains, passengers would be screaming, oxygen masks would fall, and one desperate cry, "Jesus Christ," would change everything. The late afternoon sun poured golden light across SFO, bouncing off polished windows and restless travelers wheeling bags toward their gates. Inside Terminal 3, the air was thick with coffee, jet fuel, and anticipation. Hundreds of strangers, each chasing their own destination, funneled toward Flight 2847, bound for Phoenix. Among them walked Marcus Rodriguez, 38, a software engineer in a pressed blue shirt. His stride was steady, but his eyes betrayed a storm. To colleagues, Marcus was successful, a man climbing high. Yet beneath the crisp exterior lived a gnawing emptiness. He hadn't called his mother in San Antonio in months. He hadn't stepped inside a church in years. And today's trip was supposed to close a deal that could define his career. He boarded with a leather briefcase in hand, but carried a heavier weight in his chest. At the same gate, Emma Chun, 24, clutched a nursing textbook to her chest like a shield. A nursing student a few rows ahead, Jennifer Walsh, a single mom in her 30s, held the hand of little Katie, age 6. The girl's backpack bounced with stickers of butterflies as she skipped toward her window seat. "Mommy, will we see mountains in Phoenix?" she asked wide-eyed. Jennifer brushed back her daughter's hair, hiding the fatigue behind her smile. This trip was meant to be a gift, a weekend with cousins, a break from the grind of 2 jobs and overdue bills. And just before the cabin doors closed, Father David Martinez, 52, slipped quietly into row 16. His black jacket was simple, his Bible worn. He carried no airs of authority, only a steady calm that seemed to follow him like a shadow. He had a mission ahead, serving immigrant families in Phoenix. But for now, he bowed his head in silence, offering a prayer that no one heard. At the front of the aircraft, Captain Robert Kim, former Navy pilot with 2 decades of commercial experience, finished his walk-around checklist. He had flown through storms, diverted flights, and landed in crosswinds that rattled younger pilots. To him, tonight's route was routine. Climb out of San Francisco, head east over the desert, and slip across the mountains toward Phoenix. As he took his seat in the cockpit, he glanced at the small cross hanging from his instrument panel. Most days it was just a quiet habit. Tonight, it would become a lifeline. The cabin filled with the music of everyday travel. Seat belts clicking, overhead bins slamming, flight attendants rehearsing the safety car demonstration. Marcus settled into 12A by the window, adjusting his tie. Emma slid nervously into 12B, avoiding eye contact, her hands trembling on the buckle. 2 rows up, Katie pressed her nose against the glass, tracing clouds with her finger, while Jennifer exhaled deeply, trying to let the stress roll off her shoulders. Father David rested his palms on his knees, his lips moving in silent prayer. The engines roared to life. The jet shuddered forward, nose pointed east as the city of San Francisco unfurled below like a glowing map of dreams. Inside, strangers shifted into the familiar rhythm of a journey, checking phones, opening magazines, closing eyes against the hum of takeoff. None of them could know that within hours their voices would merge in a desperate chorus, and the name Jesus Christ would echo above the roar of failing engines. Because Flight 2847 was not just a flight. It was about to become a story of fear, faith, and survival that no one on board would ever forget. The cabin of Flight 2847 filled like a small city in the sky. Every seat carrying a story. Every face reflecting a private battle. At first glance, it was ordinary. Businessmen adjusting ties, families trading snacks, students scrolling on their phones. But just beneath the surface lay the fragile threads that would soon weave together in ways none of them could imagine. Row 12 by the window, Marcus Rodriguez tapped the corner of his briefcase with restless fingers. His mind churned with numbers, contracts, and deadlines. Yet when he glanced around, something tugged at him. He noticed Emma beside him, her shoulders tense, her knuckles white as she gripped her seatbelt. She tried to distract herself by flipping through her nursing notes, but the words blurred into meaningless lines. Marcus thought about saying something to break the silence, then hesitated, unsure if he had the right. Up ahead, Jennifer Walsh settled Katie into her seat by the window. The little girl's laughter spilled into the air as she pulled out a coloring book covered with rainbows and stickers. For Jennifer, that laughter was everything. Bills could wait. The exhaustion from long hours at the clinic could wait. For this weekend, it was just mother and daughter chasing a simple joy. Family time in Phoenix. She brushed Katie's hair back, whispering, "It's going to be fun, baby." 2 rows behind, Father David Martinez adjusted his glasses and opened his battered prayer book. The words were familiar, but tonight he read them with a quiet intensity. Around him strangers scrolled, slept, or sighed. He studied their faces, not with judgment, but with the tenderness of a man who had listened to too many confessions to be surprised by anyone's burden. His mission in Arizona was clear: to serve. But perhaps his greater mission was already here, 30,000 feet in the air. A few rows farther, a businessman in a gray suit balanced a laptop on the tray table, typing as if the future depended on every keystroke. Across the aisle, 2 college students shared earbuds, laughing too loud at a playlist only they could hear. An elderly woman clutched her rosary, her lips moving in a steady rhythm that no turbulence could break. Every aisle, every row held its own microcosm of hope and fear. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Robert Kim scanned his instruments the way a soldier checks his gear before battle. 20 years in the skies had taught him to trust routine, but also to respect the unexpected. His first officer, Luis Martinez, younger but sharp, reviewed the flight path toward Phoenix. From their vantage point, it was another day, another route. Yet, the weight of more than 100 lives pressed silently behind that locked cockpit door. Back in the cabin, Emma finally exhaled, breaking the silence with Marcus. "Do you ever get nervous when you fly?" Her voice was low, but the question was raw. Marcus turned toward her, surprised. "Not really. I'm more of a feet-on-the-ground guy. But you?" She laughed nervously. "Every time. I just keep waiting for something to go wrong." She looked away quickly, embarrassed by her own honesty. But Marcus didn't judge. Instead, he offered a small nod as if to say, "You're not alone." Jennifer, overhearing Katie humming a lullaby she had learned in Sunday school, smiled softly. The tune caught Father David's ear, and he looked up, meeting the little girl's eyes with a kind smile. He raised 2 fingers briefly in a silent blessing, and Katie giggled as if she had been part of a secret exchange. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, their smiles rehearsed, but genuine enough to calm restless nerves. Coffee, soda, and peanuts passed from hand to hand. For a moment, the plane was nothing more than a traveling community, suspended above the desert, united by nothing more than a shared schedule. But hidden beneath the chatter, tension lingered like the faint hum before a storm. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool window and saw the sun dipping low over the horizon. Emma closed her eyes, whispering a quick prayer she wasn't sure she believed in. Jennifer pulled Katie close, as if to anchor her child in the vastness of the skies. Father David's lips moved steadily, calling on strength that no turbulence could shake. No one on flight 2847 could guess how desperately they would soon need each other, or how one name shouted in desperation would echo through this cabin and alter all their stories forever. Flight 2847 leveled off above the clouds. The seatbelt sign flicked off with a cheerful chime, and a collective sigh rippled through the cabin. For a brief moment, the world inside the aircraft felt steady, safe, like a small town floating 30,000 feet above the desert. Marcus Rodriguez leaned back into his seat by the window. The city lights of San Francisco, now nothing more than a fading constellation behind them. In front of him stretched the Arizona mountains, their jagged outlines catching the last streaks of sunlight. He took a slow sip of black coffee, trying to quiet the storm of calculations and contracts in his head. For the first time in hours, His breathing began to match the rhythm of the engines. Beside him, Emma Chun pressed her palms flat against her thighs, whispering the words she always told herself on flights. Stay calm. Breathe. Yet, when she glanced out the window, she caught the sight of endless sky, wide and terrifying. Marcus noticed her nervous glance and offered a half-smile. First time flying, he asked gently. She shook her head. No, just never gets easier. His tone softened. Sometimes it helps to remember we're all in the same boat or plane. For the first time, Emma chuckled, the sound fragile but real. A few rows up, Katie's voice floated into the air like a bird. The 6-year-old sang softly to her doll, a tune she had learned in Sunday school. Jesus loves me. This I know. Passengers nearby turned their heads, some smiling at the innocence of the moment. Jennifer Walsh brushed her daughter's cheek, whispering, "Keep singing, baby. You make the whole plane brighter." Across the aisle, Father David Martinez looked up from his worn prayer book and let his eyes rest on the child. A quiet blessing crossed his lips, invisible to most, yet powerful in its stillness. His gaze moved from passenger to passenger, an anxious student, a weary mother, an aging grandmother clutching a rosary, and he felt the unspoken weight each carried. He wondered if they realized how connected they already were. Strangers bound by a fragile trust in wings of metal and the skill of 2 pilots in the cockpit. The first drop felt like a roller coaster, sudden, sharp, and enough to rip the breath out of every chest. Gasps erupted across the cabin as Flight 2847 jolted downward. Drinks splashed against ceilings, a laptop crashed to the floor, and Katie's crayon snapped in two. The illusion of safety shattered in a heartbeat. Marcus Rodriguez's coffee tipped, soaking the stack of contracts on his tray. He didn't care. His eyes locked on the window where the world outside had turned into a swirl of black and gray. The plane shook violently again, the overhead bins rattling like drums. Beside him, Emma let out a cry she couldn't contain, her fingernails digging into the armrest. "This is it," she whispered, trembling. Marcus reached for her hand without thinking, gripping tight, though his own palms were slick with sweat. 2 rows ahead, Jennifer Walsh pulled Katie into her arms. The little girl buried her face against her mother's chest, sobbing. "Mommy, I don't want to fall." Jennifer stroked her daughter's hair, whispering words she didn't fully believe. "It's okay, baby. We're okay. Mommy's here." But her heart pounded so hard she thought it might give out before the plane did. From the cockpit, Captain Robert Kim's voice cracked over the intercom. "Passengers, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We are experiencing severe turbulence." But even as he spoke, alarms flared on his panel. Engine warnings, electrical fluctuations, blinking red lights that turned the cockpit into a battlefield. His first officer, Luis, shouted coordinates, fighting the controls, both men sweating under the strain of holding steel against the storm. The next lurch came harder. Overhead compartments burst open, bags tumbling into the aisle. A flight attendant lost her footing, slamming into an armrest before another crew member dragged her to safety. Their practice comm was cracking. Faces pale, voices strained, they shouted, "Stay seated." Masks may deploy. And then, with a hiss like the breath of the storm itself, the oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Yellow cups swung wildly in front of stunned passengers. Screams filled the cabin, raw and unfiltered. An elderly woman fumbled helplessly, her trembling hands unable to secure the strap. Father David Martinez rose halfway from his seat, steadying himself on the rocking aisle. Ignoring the danger, he leaned across, slipping the mask gently over her face. "Breathe slowly. You are not alone," he said, his voice calm against the chaos. Emma's mask dangled just out of reach, her panic freezing her in place. Marcus unhooked his own and pressed it to her face before securing his. She gasped, eyes wide, clinging to him as if the mask itself were a lifeline. The cabin had become a storm inside a storm. Oxygen masks swinging, passengers sobbing, voices colliding into chaos. For minutes, the plane felt less like a vessel of steel and more like a coffin plummeting through the sky. And then, amid the panic, a voice rose above the noise. It wasn't a scream of fear, but a cry of authority. Steady and unshaken, Father David Martinez, bracing himself against the aisle's seats, lifted his head and shouted with a force that carried through every corner of the aircraft. Jesus Christ, into your hands we place our lives. The name tore through the confusion like a thunderclap.